Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. This morning, I wanted to be able to follow up and commit and let you guys know about a presentation that I attended last week. I told you it was forthcoming, and I just needed to get a time to be able to do that. I was going to make it formal and scan the documents and things of that nature, and perhaps I will at a different time, and to be able to give a more formal presentation. But this issue is important enough where we all need to pay attention to what exactly is happening. So last week, there was the Department of Justice came and spoke at the College of Idaho, Albertson's College. And the title of the title of the talk was United Against Hate. As if that isn't bad enough, they did it on the day of Martin Luther King holiday. It was on 1/16/23. There was no question and answers, but to be honest, would you have been really surprised if there was? We were clearly the opposition in the room. People of like minds like you and I were the minority. Although we were there. There were probably 7 or 8 of our friends that were there. A couple of our media sources were there. I think Idaho Dispatch covered it on their Facebook page. Hopefully it's up on their website. I did see a few other people there, so thank you for them for seeing that, paying attention, and caring enough to go, because the issue really kind of slid under the radar. Now, why wouldn't it? I mean, you have the federal agency, the Department of Justice, as I won't even get it started on that. A 3-letter agency is coming into a liberal college in Caldwell, Idaho, and somehow we think it's just happenstance. Caldwell's being targeted, guys. Idaho's being targeted. Caldwell's being targeted. Most people don't realize that Caldwell was one of the most conservative counties in the state, and that is clearly something that they're trying to undo. There were probably 300 or 400 people there, maybe. I'm not really sure. I know the room was full for sure. The types of people were there are the types that you would suppose would be there, with colored hair, tall people that look like men with boobs. The usual suspects, I suppose. But one of the most glaring things when I walked in was, as if that wasn't enough, was the federal prosecutor that was there. I can't remember his name. I think it was Josh Hurwitz. I think it was his name. But anyway, I asked him, I said, so this hate thing, I said, I'm really concerned about how it's defined, what it ultimately means. It's like if I talk about the biblical foundations of this country and the fact that our founders were Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian Europeans, is that hate speech? And he said, well, you're entitled to your own opinion, but I don't believe that to be the case. And I thought, there's a reason why the DOJ came down here and is speaking at the College of Idaho and wants to disagree with me with known facts of history. So they begin the presentation with, the Pledge of Allegiance, and not the Pledge of Allegiance. They did the Star Spangled Banner, I think. And they had somebody sing, and it was very multicultural, and it was a nice meeting. It really was. But they talked about, the history of America and the struggles that we've had with. In 1776, all men were created equal, and in 1919 we had women's suffrage, and of course then you go right into the civil rights thing with 1963 with Martin Luther King and his speech after the Emancipation Proclamation. And then they basically say, oh, well, the arc bends towards justice. I mean, see, some of these things are incredibly soft and smooth and wonderful sayings, right? But nobody's questioning what kind of justice this actually is. And I'll expose more of that as we go on here. Is it social justice, or is it equal justice under the law? Well, it's clearly social justice, and like I said, I'll go on through that in a little bit. But the arc bends towards justice. I hardly agree that to be true, Mr. Prosecutor. Then you have Zoe Butler that comes up, and she gives this little poem, and she talks about climate change. She uses all the global rhetoric, right? Climate change, consciousness. And then she says something really interesting. We have to speak up for others. Dreams that were turned to nightmares and eyes wide open. Then Josh Hurwitz comes up and he blesses our law enforcement partners. So I understand those of you in law enforcement that are listening that feel like, oh yeah, we got to have a partnership with these other law enforcement agencies. But my question isn't whether you guys should be partners and what kind of what your relationship should be. It's a cognizant understanding of the separations of power and what happens when you begin to dissolve those separations. If there's no difference between the federal government and the state government, or county governments and the city governments and the city governments and the state governments, this is a recipe for disaster. What it is, it's an incremental blurring of the lines. It's an incremental national state law enforcement agency that is now becoming federalized. And evidence of that is with the openness that of the FBI and the CIA and the DOJ just to be able to have offices here in the city or the state. As I recall, constitutionally, there's no authority for that at all. Zero. And so I was a little bit taken back by that. Now, of course, they're going to say, well, Tom, we totally disagree, but they can't even agree on we can't even agree on the Constitution because he clearly, as a federal prosecutor, has no understanding of what his oath even is, apparently with what he's saying. He talks about Martin Luther King's birthday and the envision of MLK's vision. I think we should all go back to that a little bit, not necessarily understand the conspiratorial elements and who MLK was and what his connections really were, which is a subject for a completely different time that nobody seems to really know. But we seem to idolize people like this. And MLK's vision was not, I don't believe, at this point, to be able to do a lot of the things that they believed that he said to do. But he did say that they have a local branch of the DOJ that upholds the rule of law. Well, what's the rule of law? Is that any law that any legislature, any judiciary, any Supreme Court, any executive decides to be able to bestow upon the people? Hell no. So I never got a chance to be able to ask him what that means, but you know as well as I know what that means. That if somehow he's ended up given a law, no matter where it comes from, it's the rule of law. Well, I would disagree with all of that. He says, we don't prosecute. He says, under who and what? We don't prosecute in what people believe in. Really? They don't prosecute in what people believe in. I want you to remember that, and I'm going to go ahead and write it. I'm going to go ahead and underline it. We don't prosecute for what people believe in. I see. And he respects communities with differing views. Well, when you go into the arbitrariness of how they're defining hate and Christian white privilege, you can obviously see that this is an absolute contradiction in terms. But what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is a room full of mindless drones that have literally no idea about the things that I'm talking about right now. So Kate Horowitz comes up. She's the assistant to the Department of Justice attorney. She's involved with the Civil Rights State of Idaho, the Hate Crimes Division. She talks about the creation of fear and that individuals are filled with hate and they commit crimes to build, and they want to build relationships in the community. Well, listen to me. I would argue that people say there's crimes of passion and all that. Ultimately, there are crimes of hate. If you're going to commit a crime, you have a problem with somebody else, and that is not love. That's hate. So why would you need the redundancy of a hate crime? Well, they go into that a little bit later. But she openly says individuals filled with hate commit crimes. So what they have to do is they have to put you in a box as a hater, right? Before they can prosecute you so that you can be guilty of a crime, even though you believe in something different and haven't broken the law. And let's see, it says they want to build relationships in the community. The hate crime is an act of violence, threats of violence, and or if it offends a class of people protected by law. Now, this should be hugely problematic for you, because if all men are created equal, like they said in their opening statement, then how does the federal government get the authority to be able to protect a certain class of people over another class of people? And I think that Kate Horowitz should have those questions answered. And I am going to go and I'm going to ask her. I'm going to meet her. She did mention something about crime redundancy and all of that, and why do we need hate crimes and all that. We need to be able to separate harm and understand that it hurts the community. Now, I'm just reading my notes, so there could be some inaccuracies here, but I'm giving you the basic words that I wrote down. It hurts the community. They're separate and special. Idaho law on hate crimes. Free speech can be hateful, but things still can be done. And if they can't prosecute you, they find other ways to do that. By one reason is collecting data that will help build the trends for different kinds of hate in communities that report hate incidences. She said that the reason why there is such a limited amount of hate crimes isn't because there's not hate crimes. It's only because the victims aren't reporting hate crimes. So I think she said in Idaho in 2021, there were 7. And yet the DOJ feels like they need to be able to make a case, and they're supported by local law enforcement, that somehow they need to be here and they need to be talking about this. It's a big deal, basically saying that, oh, well, we have a huge problem here, even though we can't sort of tell you and show you evidence of that. We just know that people just aren't reporting crimes. I'm going to call BS on that. Clearly, I'm going to call BS on that. I don't know anybody that's got issues that the federal government is implementing on people, classifying them as something that they're not. So they said, oh, but things can still be done. We just collect data that helps describe trends. In the community's report, they need to report all hate instances. If you see something, say something, right? What she says is report it to law enforcement and the FBI. No. No, citizens don't need to report crimes to the FBI, because we don't need further incremental federalization of law enforcement in our state. I have always told law enforcement, as I've traveled the state to visit with them, if I have an issue in the city, I'm calling the police chief. If I have an issue in the county where I live, I'm going to call the county sheriff. It's up to the police chief then and the county sheriff to determine whether they believe that it's something that the federal government should be called in on. And it should be done only in constitutional matters alone, and not some sort of blurring the lines of whatever, and we just don't have the resources, so we're just going to go ahead and bend over and allow for continual incremental federalization of law enforcement. They say to be able to stop dangerous people, the DOJ offers support for victims. Well, why does the DOJ do that? We have the county that does that. We have the Victims Witness Protection Program and a variety of other things that are connected with our local sheriff's office. Why does the DOJ feel like they need to be involved in this issue? Oh yeah, here it is. 7,000 hate crimes in 2021 in our country. In our country! If I remember right, if I have this right. And it's not the fact that hate crimes aren't happening, it's that they're all underreported. Oh, Idaho had 42 instances of people that don't report, I guess. So Agent Ryan O'Neill from the FBI, he loves the fact that law enforcement is all working together. It's a kumbaya moment, you know, it's great. It's great. They work with, now here's something to consider, guys, reading between the lines. They work with non-violent law enforcement entities, and non-profits. If this includes NGOs, which it does, this is a form of globalization. This is a form of allowing things like the United Nations and the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, along with climate change consciousness and all of that garbage, to be able to help erode America and its traditions and its foundations that have been put in place for over 250 years, arguably. So then Vincent Blair comes up, and he's the one of 3 regional directors. He works commonly with groups, NGOs, religious groups, NGOs, and basically said that his justification came from LBJ Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964 under U.S.C. Title 10 that gave the FBI the jurisdiction to work in communities. I think if we go back to the FBI's original charter, we'll find that they had no law enforcement authority at all, and they were purely just an investigative organization. But like groups like the ISP and all of these other organizations, which I have friends in, by the way, this is no disrespect, it's just a point to make, is that the ISP started as a mining constabulary and now has statewide authority. And nobody even questions how it happened. Well, it happened through an executive order that gave them statewide authority when they opened up the north-south corridor on Highway 95, and the fatalities allegedly went up 500%. So the FBI apparently has jurisdiction now to be able to work with communities for a lot of reasons that allow them to breach their jurisdiction. The administration of justice, they work with school tensions and hate speech and bullying and genital mutilations. They help educate about grant funding. Grant funding? The DOJ, you are paying tax dollars to the DOJ to allow them to be able to work with school tensions, hate speech, bullying, genital mutilations, and help about grant funding, which is something that is out of the purview of the federal government and should be left for the states or the people themselves, city or county. Guys, this is dangerous. The more I heard, the more I had to get out of here. And honestly, I had to walk out before the panel even started because I don't know that I would have been able to handle what they were saying. So the next one they had was a student poet. Now, it was great. You know, the first little lady, she was a cute little black girl, and I think the next one was too, if I remember right. If I don't, I apologize. Maybe she was Asian or something. Very multicultural. It was a great, like I said, it was a great event. I mean, there were some very nice people. Everybody was cordial there. It was clear that people are absolutely clueless about what we're talking about, though. She talked about in her poem that her skin was her home. Now, I thought about that for a minute, and I thought, why is the color of somebody's skin so important? I don't care. I don't care who you are. I don't care what color you are. But to somebody with color, it helped me realize that maybe the people of color actually believe that it's more of an issue than the people that don't have color. I mean, if white is not a color. And so she brings it home again to make people think that her skin is her home, and somehow bringing us back to, if you're not white, that somehow your skin is your home and you need to be more protective and protected than anybody else. As an 18-year-old or whatever, 19-year-old, she says in her poem that she's seen it all. Covert racism, she says. Covert racism? You mean inherent racism? Like anybody that's any certain vulnerable class against the protected class is somehow racist just because of the color of their skin. Well, I would argue, what if my skin is my home? Equal justice, right? No, this is social justice. My true character is beyond stereotypes. I love that. But she just completely is inconsistent with the statement that she made before. She thirsts for freedom, although she doesn't understand its principles, peace and equality. and she wants to be known for her character, not the color of her skin. If you don't want to be known for the color of your skin, then don't talk about why your skin is your home. It's like saying I'm gay or, I'm something. It's like, do married people walk around saying, I'm married? Who cares? It's separation. It's divisiveness. And the DOJ and the federal government and the local entities that we're dealing with are all in bed with these guys propagating this garbage. So Ruth Coos comes up. Canyon County Special Victims Unit. I told you they had one in Canyon County, didn't I? So why does the DOJ need to be involved in this? Do you know why? Because if they can't get a local law to do it or a federal law to do it, they rely on the other entity to be able to make sure that they can prosecute. That's why they do that. And they're not only build on the fact that you're guilty of a local law, but you're also guilty of a federal law, or you're guilty of a federal law as well as a local law. Now, is that the way that laws are supposed to work? Oh, we're just going to go ahead and heap on everything that we can find, and somehow we're going to end up prosecuting you? This is like you're guilty before proven innocent, or sort of. This is moving into a total recall or whatever, where you have what do you call it? Preemptive crime, where you're guilty before you've even done anything. She said the Idaho Code 4, and then she said something like Title 187902 is under malicious harassment because there's no hate speech. Well, there's a reason for that. And the reason why is because malicious harassment would apply to everybody, not just somebody of a protected class. So it's an expansion of what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, oh, well, it's we're all equal, under the government, under God, and what? Intimidate. Okay, so this is interesting. Malicious harassment, Ruth Coos says, is physical injury to person or property, which is legitimately a crime should be in its entirety under the Title 18 statute. That's right. It's consistent with common law and everything else. The state may have no prosecution allowed under that statute because it's more limited than the federal statutes. They say that 5 years max, $5,000 fine might or not be prosecuted, so they will charge them for something else, like aggravated battery. They use homicide as an example with the LGBT. Really, homicide with the LGBT. So hate speech now is being equipped to homicide. The fact that you believe differently and the fact that you oppose the LGBT agenda, you oppose abortion, you are pro-life and you're pro-Constitution and you happen to be pro-white and pro-Christian, and yet somehow we don't think that we're in trouble. I wrote down that the acts of violence, they said the acts of violence shouldn't be necessarily a hate crime. If I wrote that right, forgive me if I didn't. Something about filing state charges. The feds would work to file charges, on the federal level. So while the state is working to prosecute, to find out if they can, the feds are actually working on the same thing, so that they can hopefully make sure that you're miserable by establishing and condemning you under federal statutes and state statutes. This is totalitarianism, ladies and gentlemen. This is a totalitarian police state from the information that I've received right here. The problem that they're having, this is an assessment that I've seen, the problem that the feds and the states are having is that they repeatedly talked about how difficult it is and how much effort it is to be able to determine if a crime is a hate crime or if a crime is not a hate crime. And the reason why they're doing that, ladies and gentlemen, that they don't seem to understand is it's because it's a completely arbitrary definition. It's a complete bastardization of the law. So just before the panel comes up, we got a chance to hear from Rex Ingram. Rex Ingram is the man that replaced Frank Wyant as the chief of the Caldwell Police Department. And I got to tell you, although he seemed like a nice gentleman, and apparently he's easily accessible, so we'll see. He gives a little bit about his history. And if I believe right, he said something about he grew up in Egypt, or he's Egyptian or something. And then he mentioned something about growing up in Mexico. And again, if I have this wrong, Rex, I apologize. I was writing frantic, copious notes, and I'm not trying to mislead anyone with anything that I'm saying. He did say that he grew up in Mexico. He wants to protect his country, and he wants to protect the constitutional rights. I think he also said that he was pleased to be there and pleased to be invited there. So we don't really know much about this man. Some of the law enforcement people there say they like him. I'm not sure if they were being honest or they realized they might get punished if I went and I told the chief. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the overall assessment of the United Against Hate presentation at the College of Idaho on January 16th last week with DOJ prosecutor Josh Hurwitz. And I'm encouraging you guys to review this video. I'm encouraging you to share this video. And I want you to understand that these presentations are not just in Caldwell. Apparently, as I understand it, there was a presentation not too long ago in North Idaho. This should be greatly concerning to Americans because it's a bastardization of not only our rule of law, if you will, justice, if you will, equal justice under the law, if you will, and all men are created equal, if you will, and to be able to allow people to operate only within their separate jurisdictional boundaries. Now, we have many fires that are, we've got, everything's going on everywhere. We got tons of stuff that's wrong. But I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, what they're formulating here is to repeat history again, to where when the legislature creates oppressive laws, these people have no understanding of their limitations. They have no understanding of jurisdiction. They will do what they're called to do in the name of upholding the law, and it's just their job, and again in Nazi Germany, and blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to be able to reach out today, although my video is a little bit long, to be able to help you understand yet one more issue that should be a major concern to you, and I'm hoping that you're interested in sharing it. So I appreciate that, you guys. Happy Friday. Call your local law enforcement, call your local sheriff, meet with them. I would call the DOJ's office. I would make an appointment to meet with Josh, talk about, certain things that are concerning to you. If you need some help on questions to ask and things of that nature, or if you want me to go with you, just let me know. I'd love to be able to do that. We do need to start reaching out to law enforcement. I know it's scary for a lot of people, but if we don't do it, who else will? So God bless you guys. Thanks.